I created, illustrated, and planned out an entire manga chapter in under 100 hours for an official Medibang Kyoto manga competition, judged by editors of Spy Family, Blue Exorcist, Hell's Paradise, and more. This was sort of a huge jump for me when it came to my manga creating journey, but it felt necessary. I wanted to push myself to do the best whilst being able to also create content for you guys. And the only real issue I had is I realized the deadline is in about less than a week from today, and I've got nothing. Not only was I going to be rushing to meet the deadline, but I also had to cut hours in half because I start school soon and won't have time to work on it during class hours. So this needed to be completed in approximately 4 days, but 100 hours sounds nicer, so we could just round up to that. Anyways, I needed to start the project like now. Like right now. Like, why am I even still talking? So just like my first project, I planned out the entire thing beforehand. It's always better to start with an idea and concept before jumping straight into the drawing process, because otherwise you'll be staring at a blank page without a clue in the world as to what to draw. So I took some inspiration from the fact that one of the judges works on Spy Family, and made a quick story about an undercover agent who's trying to locate and find a suspect while he is on a date. I thought I could cleverly use this manga as an opportunity to practice things I have the most trouble with, that being clothing, backgrounds, and anatomy. Anatomy in general is pretty difficult, but I'm going to have a female character as well, and female anatomy is pretty hard to keep a realistic art style mixed in with manga. We've all seen in the past how bad mangakas could be when it comes to this, and I also haven't drawn a girl character yet and thought it would be cool to do so. Once I wrote a rough outline of the general ideas of the script, I got to work right away on figuring out what the two main characters would look like. For starters, I took inspiration from Chainsaw Man when designing the main guy, as I wanted to kind of have him resemble Aki in a way. I don't know, during the process I kept thinking of Aki whenever I thought about how he would look, so I started drawing a really rough sketch of his profile and hairstyle. I made multiple hairstyle layers and chose one that stuck the most for me. It ended up kind of being the basic anime pro tag, messy longish haircut, and honestly I was fine with that. Anything more detailed would just cost more time that I just don't have, and I thought this design would fit the character well anyways. After figuring out roughly how he would look, I designed the cover page in the manga. I didn't do this for the first time around, but I knew this time I needed to set the tone of the story before even starting the actual panels. So I created a side profile shot of the main character known as the Provoker, staring into the night in a suit as somebody holds a gun towards his chin. He has a powerful sort of nonchalant stance whilst this takes place and stares down the gun as if he is not afraid. He's an experienced agent after all, and this kind of gives a cool start to the story. I'll keep popping a clock on the screen with the remaining hours in the corner, just so you guys could see like where I am and why I start to panic and lose most of the time during the process. I obviously know that things won't turn out perfectly, and that's fine. This is more or less an exercise for me to practice my skills more effectively whilst being under pressure. I continued the drawing and finished rendering it all in about 4 hours of time. Since the planning and concept took about an hour to conjure up, whilst the sketching and rendering of the cover page took another 3 hours. I was super satisfied with how the cover page turned out and posted it on my Patreon early for anyone who was following to see what I was working on. I try to keep you guys updated and in the loop, since they usually take a while to work on, and I don't want to go radio silent every time I start something new. Anyways, I got to work on the first page as soon as I finished the cover art. I wanted an opening shot of the area to set the scene, since last time I only had a small corner panel to do so. I wanted this one to truly give the reader a perspective into the environment, the mood, and the aesthetic the story was going to take place in. I started placing a 3D model asset of buildings I found in my program, and moved it to the angle and location I wanted to work with. I then started drawing over top the buildings and added textures and extra details to give it that edge it was missing. I then found an old car asset and placed it in the road near the buildings and did the same method I had done previously. I overlapped the model and added designs and extra things I thought were necessary. I then colored everything in, cleaned up some lines, added a green texture to the buildings and ground to give it more of a life and feeling of being lived in sort of look. I then took my rain brush and placed heavy rain splatters and coatings all over the scene. I then added the explosive drops of rain and mist. Another thing I wanted to do at this point was to avoid finishing one page and take breaks in between. I realized that every time I would finish a page, I would move my drawing tablet to the side and then add the text bubbles in and add extra effects. And honestly, it kind of just killed the flow of my drawing. So this time I made the decision not to add any text until the very end when everything was already rendered and ready to finish up. So far this first panel only took about an hour, and I was ready to start the next one right away. I started blocking in the details and wanted to show how exactly I made the comic styled panel pages, since some people asked in the last video. So basically within Clip Studio, which is the program I use, there's an option to add a template when starting a canvas. You can click this option and choose from their wide selection of manga-style templates that have panels already placed for you. Or you can choose one you find and sort of works with it, then move them around and place them wherever you want, just to kind of get it however you like best. I'm obviously not sponsored, but yeah, that's what I use and how I use it. I wanted the next page to be 2 panels. One of the provoker checking his phone and seeing that he received a voicemail from his boss, and the other to be him with an umbrella, sort of walking around the city in the rain, listening to it to get sort of an idea of what his mission's going to be. I pictured this scene as one of those movies where you could hear the phone call playing directly in the background, whilst the character is doing something else. So that they're not directly on the phone, but instead what we hear is what they would have heard when they listened to the voicemail. This type of scene happens quite often in modern films and is used to give a good perspective of the environment and situation, without really needing the character on screen to do anything in reaction to the actual information. I started drawing him holding his phone, as you can see, and then moved on to the next panel of him standing around and looking at the city with his umbrella. The rain is an extremely important factor and gives a good contrast to the nighttime that we see in the panels. The dark and shadowy themes with a nice white harsh rain really give the mood I was feeling and honestly works perfectly. It took me a little while to get used to drawing suits, even after practicing earlier when designing him, but I wanted to give it another go to see if I could manage to draw him backwards looking off into the distance. I then added more grain and textures all around the environment and started working on adding the harsh rain and colors. The panel turned out exactly as I planned it to, and I was happy with the flow I was in so far. Hours were passing as I continued working, but I knew that it would all be worth it in the end. I finished this page in under 2 hours and was starting to get a bit tired. I took a small break and got right back to work. I needed to spend at least 7 to 8 hours a day on the manga to reach the deadline, because sleeping would take a huge chunk out of the time I have left to finish this. I got right back to work after my break and continued with the next page. It would be the same layout as the previous page, but opposite, having one huge panel first and then a smaller one underneath it. I kind of wanted a wide angle shot of the restaurant he would be attending. I planned for it to be sort of like a fancy establishment that looked like it would be the meeting ground for some sketchy business late at night. And then I also took an asset I found of another building that kind of works and fits the aesthetic. I took that asset and I placed it at the angle I needed and started drawing in details and adding my own pieces to make it feel that it worked better for the aesthetic I was looking for. I then colored it all in, added brush details and patterns that go around the edges. I obviously couldn't forget the harsh rain, so I added that in as well, and it looked awesome. I was happy with it and I knew that an AI couldn't do any better. I then started the next panel, which would be a shot of his upper shoulders and mouth as he says something about the building in front of him. I wanted to show that he was holding the umbrella and keeping his face super stern and serious as he speaks about the situation. I then drew it all in, colored it, whilst adding the little details of the rain, dark night skies behind him, and I was super happy with this page, and it only took about an hour off my timer. Things at this point were going extremely well. That was until I started the next page. I wanted the background of the building to be extremely fancy and match some of the scenes and ideas that I was hoping for. It'd be a shot of the lady sitting at her table, whilst you could see the interior of the restaurant. I felt as though the detailed background was too exhausting to the eyes with the concept I had in mind, that when I finished drawing it, I kind of just scrapped it. I decided I would use this crappy little sketch if I was really stuck and needed some sort of background to use in a future panel. It's already been about 6 hours at this point, and I was getting tired of drawing, but I knew this page would be super important since it's the first page where we meet the girl character. I ended up using assets for fancy chairs and tables I found instead to give myself some breathing room and place them appropriately to fit the scene and style I wanted. I then started sketching out her lower body as she's sitting in the chair with her legs crossed as she waits for the provoker to arrive. Just for an easier understanding, I'll call the girl character Darla and provoker Pro, just so that we could follow along easier when I speak individually about each character. So I drew Darla sitting down with her heels and dress. I didn't like how the proportions looked multiple times, so I had to redraw her more than 3 to 4 times before I even got it right. I knew that this was going to be something I struggled with, so I kind of expected it to go this way. Like literally just this panel took me about an hour, and honestly, when I started drawing the next panel of her face, I just couldn't get anything right, and I started to feel the art exhaustion super heavily and realized it was time to call it a night. I mean, I had made huge progress and was happy so far, but obviously I didn't end the night on a good note, and that really bothered me. Day 2 started, and I slept in like a baby and lost about 12 hours of time just from sleeping. We were already about under 80 hours at this point, and we weren't even a third of the way there yet. I also had yet to draw the most detailed panels, and was starting to get worried. School was also right around the corner, and I was stressed about that as well, but nonetheless, I started drawing again. I did this process a bit off camera to give myself less pressure, and found myself enjoying the face model asset I had. I drew a face that I was happy with and pleased with, and we lost about 30 minutes of time off camera, but that's okay. As long as we figured out how Darla would look, then that was the most important aspect of this. I started drawing the rest of the panel and colored in the details and important features of her. I then added some lighting and shading to give it more emphasis on the shadows, and was happy with how it turned out. I moved on to the next panel, which was a shot of Pro holding a wine bottle up as he finally made it to the date and was there bearing a gift. This panel was easy since I've gotten pretty good at drawing hands at this point and positioning them as intended, so I flew by this panel super quickly, and these two only took me about an hour for both. I got to work right away on the next page, which would be the full introductory shot of Pro. He'd be standing there holding the wine bottle, almost in the same fashion as Johan did from Monster, but this concept rapidly started to fall apart every time I drew it. Every single time I look at this panel, I start to dislike it more and more, and I eventually grew so tired of it that I worked off camera late at night to completely scrap this entire page and redrew it. This page alone was massive and already took about an hour to complete, so throwing away an hour of work was not a good idea, but I felt like it was necessary. I hope you guys prefer this new panel as well because it took 2 hours to complete off camera, and I am not spending any more time on this page again. I started the next page, but you'll see that there's an extremely rough sketch on every panel from now on. That's because I decided to see how many pages the storyline would take and how I wanted the layout to look so I could plan more accordingly. So that's why I drew these extremely rough sketches of every single panel I planned. I found out by doing this that the entire chapter would be about 12 pages, so I was almost halfway at this point, but of course I was still rushing because I knew tomorrow I wouldn't have much of a chance to work on the manga, and that was extremely stressful. Anyways, for this page I plan to have a shot of Darla waving hello to Pro as he makes his way to the table. The next panel is Pro pulling out the chair so he can sit down as he chats with Darla. After finishing these 2 panels, I tried to start the third one, but I struggled so hard on capturing the right position for Pro's face. I knew the expression I wanted, but I also didn't want it to look too simple and boring, so I attempted multiple different facial poses and none stuck. I took a short break to rethink things through, because just the 2 panels of this page alone already took over an hour. And then when I sat back down, I realized that I was under the 70-hour mark, which means that I've already used a day of time to work on the manga. It's okay though, because once I came back, I finally got the positioning down for Pro and got to work fast. I needed to render this panel quicker than the other ones since I wasted so much time already trying to draw the initial posing of the character. 20 to 30 minute intermissions of me trying things and failing start to add up, and I don't have time to waste when it comes to finishing this before the deadline. So after drawing Pro, I added him holding a glass of wine in his hand to signify that he's comfortable and finally willing to sit down and chat with Darla. The final panel of this page was the biggest one. It was a shot of Darla with her arms crossed as she gives off a look of intimacy towards Pro. She's obviously rather intrigued with his character and wants to know more about him. Capturing the right facial expressions was difficult, but once I got the one I ended up with, I knew it was perfect and did exactly what I had planned. I started page 7 right after finishing up that panel and was excited to start. I knew what I wanted it to look like since I had laid out the sketches prior and was ready. I drew in the pose of Pro and wanted him holding a cigarette with his opposing hand. He was starting to work on his mission and was looking around at the crowds of people surrounding them. He knew that it would be tough to spot the suspect, but nonetheless he spent time looking whilst chatting to Darla about her dating life. I started adding effects and smoke to show the lit cigarette in Pro's hand, and the effect came out super cool. I then wanted the background to be a bit more detailed, so I found a column asset that I used and placed it behind him. I then overlapped it with my own line art, and then colored it in, finished rendering the panel, and I started with the next 2. Knowing they would both be shots of the crowds of people conversing, I kinda had lots of trouble trying to figure out how to make this process easier for myself. I know that most manga authors don't draw large crowds of people, especially when drawing such small panels, unless there's some sort of art god, so I went searching for a way to cut down the time since I was panicking at this point. I found an asset brush which places down modern day silhouettes of people every time I press it down. So I placed people around and scattered them so it looked natural, and then added effects to make them shadows, so they weren't just as visible as they were previously to the eye. I honestly felt kind of bad using this brush since I didn't do it myself, but I was really starting to worry that I wouldn't reach the deadline in time, and had to do what was necessary and accessible to me. I honestly really liked how it looked so much, and even added the entire background myself. I used masking layers and shine to give the windows an effect of being glass. I even added smoky gradients and textures outside to appear as if it was night, and then I even cropped the windows to add some rain falling in the background. This method worked super nicely, and I was pleased with how it looked. For the next panel, I drew in two characters chatting away. I didn't want it to be too detailed, and I also didn't want to use the brush again that I had previously used, so I kind of just sketched two rough characters in and loved how it looked. Once I finished that panel, I moved straight onto the last one of this page. There's going to be a shot of Darla reaching over and holding Pro's chin. She's trying to grab his attention away from those around them and bring it back towards her and their date. Drawing the hand and facial proportions was not easy, and I struggled with this panel a shit ton more than I thought I would. I even tried using a hand model asset, and even that looked off, so I decided to give myself a second to look at some actual hand references on the internet, until eventually one of my sketches clicked. I was happy with how it looked, and continued with the panel as usual. I even added in some colors, shading, and the effects behind the hand and head. Pro's giving sort of like a shocked facial expression, as he didn't expect her to grab him, and her hand is placed in a way that isn't violent or filled with malicious intent, but rather softly placed on his chin. Once this page was complete, I decided I'd do one more before the night ends just to see how much time I actually have left. I started the next page with another angle of her holding Pro's chin. In this panel, he looks more calm and is comfortable with the situation. He starts to hold her wrist and explain that he's sorry and will start to pay more attention to her from now on. Obviously, he looks calm and relaxed while holding her arm to ensure she doesn't get any false ideas about his motive or why he's here. This positioning turned out great and I was super happy with it. The only part I sort of struggled with was trying to get his hand on her arm to look right. Because if I had drawn it in a certain way, it could either look like he was grabbing her with force, or it could look like her arm was tiny or way too large. So I think I found a good mix of the angle and also how it's supposed to look, and so I started right away with the next panel. It was a panel like a similar one that we had earlier in the manga, where it shows Pro's phone start to ring. But this time it has a vibration effect to give the idea of sound. I wasn't sure how exactly to properly capture this scene yet. I just knew I wanted to show his pocket with a vibration effect, to give off the idea that he's receiving a phone call, and I didn't want there to be words necessary. I feel as though it's important to make your art express itself without needing a description of what's going on, and I always use that as a way to kind of look at your panel without the text bubbles to see if it still conveys the right message even without the words. I then drew in a super fancy chair and was trying to draw Pro sitting down whilst the phone vibrates, but no matter how many times I tried, I couldn't get it looking right. I genuinely started to get frustrated and took a small break. Once I came back, I forgot to hit record and started drawing it from a side angle. I was literally so locked in that I finished it in about 30 minutes and it looked perfectly as I intended it to. I'm pretty sure I have the time lapse, so maybe I'll put that up on the screen if I remember to. Anyways, I moved on to the final panel of the night, and it was a close-up shot of Darla. For this panel, she's kind of conveying some sort of sinister expression. She tells him to pick up the phone, and she's clearly getting annoyed at this point, since not only was he not paying super close attention to her on the date, but now he's getting phone calls during their time together. I continued the panel as usual and colored and rendered it, and was satisfied with the progress I'd made today. A whole entire day has passed, plus the additional timing I spent sleeping in today, and wow, we have only 30 hours left to complete this manga, and I needed 3 more pages, and some of the most detailed ones were still yet to come. It was time to work fast. Not only did I need to finish these panels, but I also needed to add the text bubbles in and create a story that made sense with the flow of the panels. By the time I got to this next page, I started to have insane pain in my wrists. I literally have never drawn this much in such a short amount of time, so I was definitely starting to struggle. I began with a shot of Pro's phone as he sees that he's getting a call from his boss. Obviously he is shocked because why would his boss be calling him in the middle of a mission, so it must be really important. I decided from now on I would just draw the line art in order to save my wrist from having to color in each panel right now, and honestly, I just wanted the hardest part done before I started coloring them, and this process sped up my workflow quite a lot. I felt a lot more productive this way since I was able to get down the actual drawings of the pages faster and didn't have to worry about rendering them right now. Anyways, I got to work on the next panel, which is Pro pointing his finger up to Darla to signify that it won't be long, and that he'll be right back as soon as possible. He's clearly nervous and just wants to stay calm and calm down the situation before things get out of hand. The next panel is Darla smiling as she tells him it's fine and that she's sure he'll be back quick. Honestly, once I finished this page, I was getting done with this process. I started getting so painfully tired and also needed to prepare for school, but nonetheless, I pushed through and conquered until it was finished. I started one of the biggest panels of the storyline. It's a shot of Pro walking away from the table whilst he's on the phone with his boss. Obviously, he's surprised and worried as to why he's getting a call during his mission, and I needed to capture that expression. I genuinely wanted him to feel as rushed as I did with this challenge. This line art only took me about 30 minutes, and I was super happy with it. I think the suit turned out super nice, and it honestly looks perfect. So I decided to move on to the second last page of the chapter. This page only has 2 panels. One was a close-up shot of Pro as his boss reveals some rather scary information, and the other panel, a large, shocking reaction from Pro as he hears about this information. I started drawing it as quickly as I could, and it genuinely turned out fine. I was super happy with it, and it didn't feel as though it looked rushed at all. I then started the next panel and wanted it to look effective and give off a sense of shock, without really needing any words. I drew a very rough outline of Pro and his facial expression whilst he's looking down at his phone in front of him. I then added lots of strobe effects and a harsh line art to make it pop. Honestly, I was super proud of this page and quickly moved on to the next one. Now, with the final page, this is quite the spoiler, but it's a shot of Darla taking a shot at Pro. She was a suspect all along, and that information the boss told Pro on the phone was a lead on the suspect. Darla had found out Pro's true intentions before he could figure out who the suspect was, and that mistake could potentially cost him his life. Anyways, I drew a full page panel of Darla swinging her dress away from her concealed weapon. She's pointing it directly at us, and the posing took quite a few attempts to get right, but I found the correct angle at some point and stuck with it. I knew that she was going to have some sort of maniacal expression, but I couldn't quite achieve it at this very moment, and decided that when I color and render the panels, I would fix her facial expression and clean things up better next time. Now, by the time I was done with the line art for the entire manga, I had about 25 hours left on the clock. I did the rest of the things I had to do for the day and went to sleep one last time during this challenge. I woke up with about 8 hours left before the end of the deadline. The only real struggle I was facing at this point was that my wrist was still hurting super badly, and I needed to take breaks every few minutes or so, since it was basically unbearable. I know I sound like a baby, but it genuinely felt like a piranha was gnawing on my arm whenever I held it in the proper position to draw in color. Anyways, I colored in the rest of the panels, which took me about 3 hours, and was basically finished at this point. I just needed to add in the text bubbles, and voila. I was finished the entire manga in under 100 hours, with 4 more hours to spare. I was super proud of myself and the outcome of this challenge. I feel like I learned a lot about what it takes to meet a deadline, and how exhausting and tiring this can be for mangakas that have to publish chapters every week. Anyways, here are all the pages in a quick scroll. I'll have them posted in the description on WEBTOON and also submitted directly to the manga competition's website. Super excited for my next project, but I think I'll need a little time to settle into school and give my wrist a bit of a break. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. I'll have my Patreon, which is completely free to join, down in the description for updates on future projects and videos, and I'll see you guys next time.